There's a huge story breaking in the UK right now that could see millions, and I mean millions of drivers getting a pretty significant payout. So what on earth is this all about? And the big question is, could you be one of them? Let's get into it.
Okay, let's start with the most important question right off the bat. If you bought a car on finance at any point inside this 14-year window, then you're going to want to pay very close attention. This could affect you directly.
Because, get this, according to consumer champion Martin Lewis, that's how many people in the UK could be in line for some sort of compensation. 14 million. Just let that sink in. It's an absolutely staggering number, and it just goes to show how widespread this whole issue really was.
So, if we're talking about 14 million people being affected, what does that actually look like in financial terms? Well, the potential figures being thrown around are just massive. The UK's financial regulator, the Financial Conduct Authority, or the FCA, they're estimating the total cost for this whole compensation scheme could be anywhere from 9 to 18 billion pounds. But look at this, the industry body, the Financing and Leasing Association, is kind of pushing back. They're saying it should be a lot lower. So right there, that tells you there's a big debate going on about just how big this problem really is.
All of this just begs the question, right? How did we even get here? Why could millions of people be owed money for a car they might have bought years and years ago?
Well, the answer comes down to this one kind of jargony phrase, discretionary commission arrangements, or DCAs. It sounds complicated, but in simple terms, it was a system where the car dealer got to decide at their own discretion how high to set the interest rate on your car loan.
So here's how it worked. You'd go and apply for finance. Then, the dealer had the power to actually increase the interest rate that the lender was offering. And why would they do that? Simple. A higher interest rate meant a bigger commission for them. And the end result, of course, was that you, the buyer, ended up paying more over the life of the loan, probably without ever knowing about this hidden incentive. So, this brings us to the big one. The question you're probably asking yourself right now. Could you be eligible for a payout? First up, let's talk about the time frame. The investigation is really focused on cars. We're talking both new and used, that were bought on finance between 2007 and January 2021. That's the date the FCA finally stepped in and banned these commission models.
Okay, let's really get into the nitty-gritty of who might be eligible. This mostly impacts people who use those really common types of finance, like a personal contract purchase, a PCP, or a hire purchase deal. The key things are that your agreement had one of these discretionary commission arrangements baked into it, and crucially, the dealer never told you about the extra commission they were making off the back of it. Okay, so let's say you're sitting there, ticking all the boxes, thinking you might be eligible. The next logical question is, how much are we actually talking about for an individual? Is this like a lottery win? Well, the FCA is trying to manage expectations a little bit here. Their current thinking is that most people will likely get back less than £950. So yeah, it's definitely a nice sum of money to get back, but it's probably not a life-changing amount for most. And on top of that payout, the FCA is also planning to add interest. Now, the exact calculation is a bit technical, but it should work out to roughly 3% per year. It's just a little extra to make up for the time you were overcharged. So with all this going on, what should you actually be doing right now? Let's take a look at the official advice.
This quote from the head of the FCA, Nick Gilrathy, is really telling. They are actively trying to design a system that's simple enough for you and me to use directly without needing to hire some middleman who's going to take a slice of the pie.
So here it is, your action plan. The number one piece of advice right now is to just sit tight and wait for the official scheme to be announced. You could think about putting in a formal complaint to your lender now just to get it on their radar. But the most important point here is to avoid those claims management companies. The FCA is building a system that's free to use, and these firms can take up to 30% of your money for doing something you'll be able to do yourself for free.
And finally, it's worth knowing that this whole process is far from finalized. The FCA is still trying to figure out the best way to even handle all these payouts. Should it be an opt-out scheme where you're automatically included, or an opt-in one where you have to actively go and make a claim? It is a huge logistical challenge, and it kind of leaves us with this massive question. What really is the fairest and most effective way to right a wrong for 14 million people?
Okay, listen up, because if you bought a car on finance anytime over the last couple of decades here in the UK, you could be owed some serious money. We're talking about a massive new payout scheme, and some are saying it could be even bigger than the whole PPI scandal. It all comes down to hidden commissions in car loans, and this is news that could affect literally millions of us. So let's just cut straight to the chase.
here's the big question. I want you to think back. Did you finance a car anytime in this huge 17-year window? We're talking from April 2007 right up to January of 2024. If the answer is yes, then you need to pay close attention because there's a very real chance you are overcharged. Wow. I mean, just take a second to look at that number. It's enormous. The UK's financial regulator went through 32 million car finance deals, and their conclusion? A staggering 14 million of them were likely missold. That's nearly half. It's absolutely mind-boggling. So what does that actually mean for your wallet? Well, the regulator estimates that the typical payout for each of those missold deals is going to be around 700 quid. Now that is a pretty significant chunk of cash that could be heading right back into people's bank accounts.
All right, so here's the crucial part. We need to get our heads around how this mis-selling actually worked, because this wasn't about the car you bought, not at all. This was all about the finance deal itself and a hidden, sneaky system that often meant you were paying way more than you ever should have.
And this timeline just puts the sheer scale of the problem into perspective. The period this affects stretches all the way from April 2007 to November 2024. That is a gigantic window of time. Now, the plan, as it stands, is for the official payback scheme to get going sometime in early 2026. So, who exactly is covered by all this? Well, the scheme is zeroing in on the two most common ways people in the UK buy cars on finance. We're talking about your classic hire purchase or HP agreements, and of course the incredibly popular personal contract purchase, PCP deals. When you really boil it all down, this whole scandal hinges on one single idea: non-disclosure. As Martin Lewis puts it so well, the problem wasn't just what was happening, it was the fact that it was all hidden from you, the customer. If they told you what was going on, well, it wouldn't be mis-selling, would it? So, how exactly were people getting overcharged? What were the actual tricks of the trade? Well, the financial regulator has basically identified 3 distinct hidden practices that dealers were using. So let's break them down one by one. Here they are, the big 3. First, we've got something called discretionary commission arrangements, and trust me, this is the main one. Then there's contractually tied lenders, and finally, just plain old unfairly high commission. Okay, so let's tackle the biggest one first. Discretionary commission arrangements, or DCAs for short. Now, this was basically a system that gave the car dealer, the person sitting opposite you at the desk, the power to actually change the interest rate they were offering you on your loan. And here's the real kicker. The dealer had a direct financial incentive to set your interest rate higher. Why? Simple. The more interest you paid, the more hidden commission they secretly pocketed. And of course, you had absolutely no idea this was going on behind the scenes, which is exactly what makes it so unfair. The second practice was all about being contractually tied. So picture this. The dealer tells you, "Don't worry, I'm going to search my whole panel of lenders to find you the very best deal." Sounds great, right? But in reality, one particular lender had a secret first dibs agreement, which meant you probably weren't getting the best deal available on the market at all. And the third type is pretty black and white: unfairly high commission. The regulator actually set some really specific red lines for this. If the dealer's commission was both more than 35% of the total interest cost and more than 10% of the amount you borrowed, well, that was deemed to have distorted the market, and it means you were officially overcharged. So that's the problem. But enough about what went wrong. Let's talk about the solution. How are you actually going to get your money back if you are one of the millions affected? Let's dive into the new redress scheme.
And here's the really great news. They're trying to make this whole thing as simple as possible. The regulator has created a single, standard calculation for most cases. And what that means for you is no arguing, no back and forth, no trying to prove exactly how much you are overcharged by.
So what is this standard calculation? Well, it all comes down to one simple number: 17%. And what does that mean in practice? It's simple. You are set to get a refund of roughly 17% of the total amount of interest you paid over the life of that loan.
Let's put that into real-world money. For every £1,000, every grand you were charged in interest on your car finance, you should get £170 back. It's a really straightforward calculation.
All right, this brings us to what is probably the most important part of this whole explainer. Now that you know all of this, what should you actually do right now? Here is your action plan. Okay, so there are 2 different paths from here, and it all depends on whether you have complained already. If you have, good news. The firm has to contact you within 3 months, and you'll be automatically included in the payout scheme. But if you're new to this, the firm has to try and find you within 6 months, but, and this is so important, you will have to actively opt in to get paid. It's not automatic.
So the key takeaway here is crystal clear, and it's what Martin Lewis has been saying. It's going to be a lot easier for you if you're in that first group, the "I've already complained" category. By getting a complaint in now, before the scheme even properly starts, you make the whole process pretty much automatic, and you avoid any hassle of having to opt in later.
Now, I know what a lot of you are probably thinking right now. What happens if your agreement was from, say, 2009, and the finance company has probably deleted all its records by now? Does that mean you just miss out? Well, no, not necessarily, but the responsibility to prove you had the loan might fall on you. So now's the time to do a little bit of digging. See if you can find any proof. We're talking old credit reference files, old bank statements that show those monthly payments. Or, if you're super organized, maybe you still have the original loan paperwork tucked away somewhere. So we'll end on this thought. After everything we've covered, it is entirely possible, likely even, that an old, forgotten car finance deal you had years ago could be worth hundreds of pounds to you. But the only way you're going to know for sure is to take action.
So, have you bought a car on finance any time in, say, the last 20 years or so? If the answer is yes, then you really need to listen up, because you could be one of millions of people who are owed a slice of a massive multi-billion-pound payout. We're going to break down exactly what happened, and more importantly, what it could mean for your bank account.
Here's what we're diving into. First, we'll get our heads around the absolutely staggering amount of money we're talking about. Then, we're going to pull back the curtain on the hidden commission problem that started this whole thing. After that, we'll look at what the regulators plan to do about it, dig into the big debate over whether that plan is actually fair, and we'll finish up with a clear, simple list of what you need to do next. So, let's talk numbers. Just how big is this whole thing? Well, the figures are pretty mind-boggling, and they really show just how widespread this issue was for a very, very long time. Okay, let's start with the headline number. 8.2 billion pounds. That's the potential bill that the UK's financial watchdog, the FCA, thinks lenders might have to pay out. To put that into perspective, this is one of the biggest consumer compensation schemes we've seen in the UK in a long, long time. It's a huge deal.
So you're probably wondering, okay, does this actually affect me? Well, the crucial time frame is any car finance deal you took out between April 2007 and late 2024. If that rings a bell, then yeah, you could absolutely be one of the millions of people who were overcharged and might be due some cash back.
So how do we get to that massive 8.2 billion pound figure? Well, let's break it down. We're looking at 14 million different finance agreements being investigated. The FCA thinks that almost half, 44%, of all deals made since 2007 could be eligible. Right now, they're estimating the average payout will be around £700 per person. But, and this is a big but, it was previously estimated to be higher at £950, and that little detail is causing a lot of arguments. Okay, so how on earth did we get here? I mean, how was a system like this allowed to run for so long, affecting so many people? The whole thing boils down to a practice that's now banned, a system built entirely on hidden commissions.
It was all based on something with a very dull name: discretionary commission arrangements, or DCAs. Basically, this gave car dealers the power, the discretion, to set the interest rate on your loan. And here's the kicker: the higher the interest rate they charged you, the bigger the commission they got from the finance company. It was a direct incentive to overcharge you. So you can see how this created this completely unfair cycle, right? You walk in, you need a car loan. The dealer, knowing they can make more money for themselves, offers you a loan with a higher interest rate than you should have gotten. You accept, because how would you know any different? Then, behind the scenes, the lender pays the dealer a bigger, secret commission. And the result? You end up overpaying, month after month, year after year, completely in the dark. And look, this wasn't some flash-in-the-pan problem. The investigation goes all the way back to 2007. It actually took until January 2021 for the FCA to finally step in and ban these DCAs. So now, with the investigation covering deals right through late 2024, the goal is to get this new compensation scheme up and running by early 2026.
Okay, so we've got a handle on what went wrong. Now let's talk solutions. What is the FCA, the financial regulator, actually planning to do to make this right for people?
Right, this is probably the single most important thing to take away from all this. The official compensation scheme that the FCA is setting up will be 100% free for you to use. You should not have to pay a claims management company or anyone else to get the money you're owed.
Remember that.
So how this will actually work depends on your situation. If you've already put a complaint in, the lender is supposed to contact you directly. If you haven't complained yet, don't worry, your lender should get in touch with you within 6 months of the scheme launching, asking you to opt in. And if you hear nothing, maybe you've moved house and they can't find you, you'll have a whole year to make a claim yourself.
But of course, it's never that simple, is it? The FCA has put forward a plan, but not everybody thinks it's the right one. And this is where the story gets really complicated. Let's get into the debate.
So you've got two very different stories here. On one side, the regulator is saying pretty clearly, it's time their customers get fair compensation. But on the other side, the lending industry is pushing back hard. They're claiming the FCA is overcompensating people and that the number of customers affected just seems implausibly high. It's a fundamental clash over what's fair and how big the problem really was.
You know, even the head of the FCA is basically admitting this is a massive balancing act. He's on record saying they know there are strong opinions on all sides, and that ultimately, not everyone will get everything they would like. That's a pretty big hint that the final plan is going to be a compromise, and it might leave both drivers and lenders a bit unhappy.
And that's exactly what the lawyers representing drivers are zeroing in on. They're looking at that estimated £700 average payout. Remember, down from that earlier estimate of £950. And they're asking, does that amount really match the severity of wrongdoing that was going on for more than a decade? It's a fair question.
And then you have consumer champion Martin Lewis, who has a very clear, very blunt message for the lenders who are fighting this plan. He's basically saying, look, if you want this to be over with, just stop fighting it. Let's get this done and let everyone move on.
Which, of course, brings us to the most important part of this whole thing. After all of that, what should you personally be doing right now if you think you might have been affected?
Okay, here's your 4-step action plan, straight from the FCA's guidance. First, be proactive. Get in touch with your lender or broker now and log a complaint. Second, be patient. The complaints process is paused at the moment, but logging one now gets you in the line. Third, and this is a big one, be wary. You do not need a claims company for the official scheme. Regulators have already taken down over 700 misleading ads from these firms. And finally, be informed. If you can, make sure any old lenders have your current contact details so they can find you when the time comes. And so that leaves us with the one big question that's hanging over this entire saga. Is this multi-billion-pound plan a fair solution that finally gets justice for millions of drivers? Or is it just an attempt to settle a massive decade-long scandal on the cheap? The debate is far from settled, and honestly, only time will tell. Thanks for joining us.
Today, we are breaking down a massive financial story that could literally put money back in your pocket. We're talking about a huge compensation plan for millions of drivers all across the UK, so let's get right into it.
Okay, let's start with a really simple question. I want you to think back. Did you buy a car using a loan anytime in that 13-year window? If the answer is yes, then you are definitely going to want to pay close attention.
So if you did buy a car on finance back then, the UK's financial regulator, the Financial Conduct Authority, you'll hear them called the FCA, has a pretty big announcement. See, they think a whole lot of people were overcharged, and now they put a plan in place to make it right.
So, what is this all about, really? Well, it all comes down to a sneaky problem with how some of these car loans were actually sold. It wasn't about the car you bought. It was all about the commission the dealer was making on the finance deal. At the heart of this whole thing is something called a discretionary commission arrangement, or DCA. Now, what that basically means is that the person selling you the car had the power to actually bump up your interest rate. And why would they do that? Simple. The higher they set it, the more cash they made.
And this is where you can really see the problem, right? On the left, that's how it should work. Your rate is based on your financial situation, fair and square. But on the right, you see the DCA issue. The dealer had a massive incentive to make your loan more expensive for you just so they could pocket more commission. Not exactly in your best interest.
So because this was, pretty unfair, the FCA has stepped in to sort this whole mess out. Let's take a look at what their plan is and the timeline for getting this fixed.
Okay, here are the dates you need to know. We're looking at a huge window of time. Any finance agreement from 2007 all the way up to 2020 could be affected. The FCA is going to announce its final plan in 2025, and the payouts, well, they should start rolling in sometime after that.
Okay, this is the big one, right? The question everyone's asking, how much money are we actually talking about here? Well, at first, people were getting pretty excited, but the official numbers have calmed things down a bit.
Early on, consumer champ Martin Lewis suggested the average payout could be around £1,100 per person per loan. And a number like that, well, it got a lot of people's attention and really showed how big this issue was.
But the FCA has now come out with its own official estimate. They're suggesting that a typical payout will probably be more like £950, maybe even a bit less. Now, don't get me wrong, that's still a nice chunk of change, but it's a little lower than what people were first hoping for.
Now, before you go rushing off to make a claim, the FCA has a really important warning for everybody. You know how it is. Whenever there's a big payout scheme like this, these claims management companies pop up everywhere, and the regulator wants you to be careful.
And listen, this isn't just some vague advice. This is a direct quote from Cherie Howard, an executive director at the FCA. She's making it crystal clear. Use one of these companies and you could lose a huge slice of your own money.
And just to put that into perspective, take a look at this. A 30% fee, what does that actually look like? Well, on that £950 payout, you're just handing over nearly 300 quid, 285 to be exact, for something the FCA says you can easily do yourself for absolutely nothing.
And they are serious about this. They're not just, putting out a press release. They are spending £1 million on a campaign. They're on the radio, they're running online ads, they're even using social media influencers to get the word out you can claim for free.
So, how do you actually do it yourself? Well, the FCA has been super clear that the process is meant to be simple. You don't need to be a financial whiz to do this.
Honestly, it really is this straightforward. Okay, step 1. You've got to dig out that old paperwork and figure out who the lender was. Step 2. Get in touch with them directly and just say you want to complain about a discretionary commission arrangement. And step 3, just follow their process. And remember, they have to provide a free way for you to do this.
And that's our look at the FCA's big compensation scheme. It's a huge step to fix something that went wrong in the past, but it does leave you wondering, doesn't it? With finance companies looking at this massive bill, what does this mean for the future of car loans? Is getting finance for your next car going to change because of all this?